Hello and welcome to this broadcast by Brexit Watch. I'm your host, Jonathan Saxty. Today we are delighted to welcome back to Brexit Watch the chairman of the Brexit Party and the soon-to-be Reform UK, Richard TICE. Richard, welcome back to Brexit Watch.
Thanks. It's great to be back, Jonathan. And it's been quite a busy week, as you can imagine. Now that we've announced our plans to rebrand, to rename the Brexit Party, looking forward. So we've made an application to the Electoral Commission to agree with the new name and the new brand and the new logo that we've sent them. And we hope, in their usual friendly way, that they will agree pretty shortly.
Now, Richard, we've seen the article penned by yourself and Nigel Farage in the Telegraph announcing the renaming and relaunch of the Brexit Party as Reform UK. Obviously, came hot on the heels of the newly announced second national lockdown for England. So I possibly know the answer to this question before I ask it, but why now?
Well, we've actually been looking and reflecting for some time, about what was going on in the political scene here in the UK, and was there an opportunity for us to continue to shape and influence events? Obviously, through this year, as we always said, we were going to be focusing on making sure that the government kept to its promises on the Brexit transition period and the negotiations, either for a deal or if a deal wasn't possible. And we're still doing that, be under no illusions. Our key focus is of course to make sure that the government sticks to its word and does not in any way sell us down the river. And we're getting very close to knowing where they're at on that. But in fairness, and credit where credit's due, so far they've stuck to their word. But the Tories are very good at saying one thing and then doing another. So we are cautiously very sceptical, but let's hope they continue to stick to their word. In the event that they sell out fishing or the opportunities from being able to starting to avoid having a leg of a playing field, the essential need to use state aid where essential, these are all critical things in a Brexit deal. We'll be very focused on that. But equally, there is another major crisis facing the UK, which is obviously the government's approach to COVID. And we've always said, we said at the beginning of this year that we would look to essentially look to reform things going forwards. And this is the first major thing that needs reforming, and it's very urgent because the impact on tens of thousands of people's health, non-COVID patients, the impact on mental health, on suicides, the impact on thousands of businesses, millions of jobs. These are all the other impacts of the government's total obsession to the detriment, to the destruction of everything else on COVID. It's urgent, and we need to play our part to try and convince the government to reform its approach and to adopt the approach that we believe is the best solution to this situation, which is the Great Barrington Declaration, which of course has been promoted by some of the world's finest epidemiologists, the likes of Sunetra Gupta from Oxford, the likes of Carl Hennigan, also from the Centre of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford, from scientists at Harvard, at Stanford, and tens of other fine scientists. And the thing about the Great Barrington Declaration is it's very simple. It says we need to be much better at focusing properly, determinedly, robustly, focusing protection around the vulnerable, around the elderly who want protecting. Of course, many actually don't. They want to hug their children and things, but focusing the protection around those who need shielding, need protecting, who want it, and do that job properly. At the moment, there's a sort of scattergun approach. Testing 300,000 people sounds all very well and good, but actually what's happening is that huge amounts of resources are being wasted testing students who've got no symptoms in university towns, when actually, sadly, there is not daily regular testing going on of care home staff, of hospital staff, which is where it would be much better to focus that protection. So the Great Barrington Declaration is about focusing the protection there, and then the rest of us using sensible, common sense hygiene measures, washing your hands, social distancing, wearing a mask. Actually, we need to get on with our lives. And that's what it's about. And effectively, that is broadly what strategy has been adopted, for example, in Sweden, with considerable success. And yes, they accept that they made mistakes. They didn't focus enough protection in the early months in the care homes, but at least they admit and learn from their mistakes, unlike this government that refuses to admit it's made any mistakes at all. And you now look at Sweden, and what's happened there is over the summer and the autumn, a level of immunity has built up, which means now they're seeing not a significant spike in cases, and their deaths are ranging between 1 and 5 a day. Every death, of course, is a tragedy for the family, the friends, and the loved ones. But they've built up that level of immunity, and the economic hit, and in terms of the impact on businesses, on jobs in Sweden, is probably a third of the economic hit that we've seen so far. And with this new second totally unnecessary national lockdown, we are going to see, sadly, a much greater hit to our economy. Many thousands of businesses, small businesses, self-employed, who've been literally clinging on by their fingertips. Sadly, those fingernails are going to be ripped from their fingers by this government's unnecessary second lockdown, and people are going to be literally thrown on the scrap heap of unemployment by a Tory government that simply doesn't seem to understand, and I question whether it cares.
Richard, you've spoken a bit about the consequences. I was going to ask you about that, but since you've covered that, I'll move on to my next question. Obviously, lockdown is something, or the second lockdown is something happening right now. One assumes, fingers crossed, we don't see lockdowns continuing into 2021. Famous last words, of course.
Watch this space.
Well, quite. So what is the short-term immediate objective of Reform UK, and is there a long-term objective as well you could speak about?
Absolutely. So great question. Thank you. And so the immediate objective, which is urgent, and in a sense, we're like special forces. We launched with an urgent mission to save democracy in the UK by making sure that Brexit was delivered. We achieved that mission. We went back to base. Essentially, we've been watching, waiting, retraining. There's another urgent mission. So we've come out and we're going to try and working with lots of other groups, non-political groups, build up a consensus, a groundswell of opinion to force this government to change its approach to the virus. So that's the urgent objective. We don't know how long that'll take, but then just in about 7 months' time, there are a raft of elections here in the UK. There's Scottish regional elections, Welsh regional, London elections, local elections, Police and Crime Commissioner elections, all due to happen next May. And we intend to be standing in many, if not all of those elections. And I'm delighted to say just yesterday, we had well over 1,000 applications to be candidates in all of those elections. So we will be pushing on hard, vetting, interviewing, et cetera, between now and Christmas, with a view to standing in those elections so that we can give the British voters, the British electorate, the small business owners, the people who've been made unemployed, the students who've been so badly let down, to give them an opportunity to express their view on this government's performance or woeful performance on the virus and on running the country in general. So that's the sort of 7-month objective, and then we'll build towards, albeit a distant, general election. But I think there will be a really receptive audience to look at in more detail the reform agenda that we put forward. We started it with our contract with the people last December. It didn't really get properly looked at and understood in amongst all the noise about get Brexit done and all the fear of Corbyn. But we stand by that contract. We will build on it, and you know, there are some really important areas of reform. And sadly, what this virus has done, it has completely punctured the absurd balloon of craven belief that MPs and Westminster had about the quality of our civil service. When the chips were down and when it was most needed, actually chunks of our civil service and quangos have been found wanting, have been found to be serially incompetent at a moment of crisis. So this idea that the civil service is the jewel of the crown and the envy of the world is utter garbage, nonsense, gibberish, and people should never ever use that expression again. Major reform is needed of our civil service. The billions of pounds that have been wasted during this crisis is extraordinary. The cronyism within which Tory ministers have given huge contracts without any form of scrutiny or tendering to mates or mates of mates, I think will come out and be one of the sort of the lasting legacies of this crisis. And just simple things in terms of the reform agenda. We've always said the House of Lords need reform. Goodness me, more and more people realise that when the Prime Minister appointed his own brother to the House of Lords, a former Tory MP whose only notable achievement was to resign not once but twice from a Tory government, the second time to resign in protest at his own brother. So I think there's a big reform agenda, and it's important, it's urgent, and I think more and more people now recognise that, and that's what we stand for. A party reform. We need to reform big chunks of the way the UK works.
Richard, you mentioned the reception that Reform UK is likely to get, and I will touch on that. But you also mentioned the possibility of working with like-minded groups and individuals. You'll no doubt be aware of Lawrence Fox's party. You'll be aware of, I think it's called his is Reclaim. I think so.
Yep.
There's Recovery UK, I believe, and now obviously Reform UK. People have spoken about the 3 Rs. Is it possible that you would work with other groups, especially as there may be a danger, of course, that there may be an anti-lockdown libertarian sort of movement, but it could potentially be fragmented by different groups. So is working with like-minded groups something that you would countenance?
Completely. In fact, we welcome it because there are more different groups with particular focuses and specialisms. Lawrence is doing a brave, courageous job at taking on the woke wallies with all the sort of the culture wars and things, and we applaud that. Likewise, Recovery, who've just launched, that's a broad coalition, a non-political coalition, putting forward the important arguments, because there are many people who feel passionately that the government's got this approach wrong, but for a variety of reasons, completely understandable. It's better for them not to, in a sense, align themselves with any political party of one or other persuasion. So that's good. Likewise, the scientists, particularly those of the Great Barrington Declaration, their objective is to get the right approach. They don't, understandably, want to align themselves with a political party. So we're sort of like a triumvirate, really. You've got the scientists, you've got the economists, you've got the political pressure, and we can all apply pressure from different angles on the government to change its approach, because we passionately believe this is what's in the national interest. So no, absolutely, we want to work with groups. The most important, urgent thing is to change this approach, to change the complete rather sheep-like concession of the mainstream media to the government's position. It's really interesting, actually. They literally won't allow the Great Barrington Declaration to be discussed on mainstream media. Just yesterday, in an extraordinary interview that I did with Adam Bolton of Sky News,
I saw.
He was furious that I kept wanting to talk about the Great Barrington Declaration. He tried to sweep it away under the carpet, and it's not the first time. There are examples where scientists have been asked to come on the BBC, but been banned from using the words the Great Barrington Declaration, and if they did so, they weren't going to come on. This is censorship bordering on the sort of thing you might expect in the Chinese Communist Party or in North Korea. not in supposedly the mother of all democracies, the United Kingdom.
Richard, let's touch on the reception that Reform UK may have out there in the country. Now, you'll have seen the polling, I have too, which suggests that a majority of the population support the government's policies. We've seen this phenomenon called preference falsification before. We don't know if that's going on, but we can't rule it out. I mean, anecdotally, I don't know many people who are supporting this, and I believe that as the full economic devastation is revealed, fewer and fewer people will support what has happened. So you could talk a little bit about that, and also how Reform UK can actually build support among perhaps people who aren't Brexiteers. I mean, yes, there will be an overlap between anti-lockdown types and Brexiteers, that libertarian link, but there will be people who are anti-lockdown who are Remainers. So how does
absolutely. Yeah, and it's absolutely. So I think what's happened is that, we're all a bit skeptical of polls. And there's a couple of things going on. I think YouGov has become the propaganda arm of the government in the same way that some of the social media platforms are acting as a censorship arm of the government, suspending Twitter accounts from the likes of Alison Pearson or Simon Dolan, who are, very skeptical of the government approach. And whether maybe YouGov have got themselves a link into about 1,000 civil servants working in their comfy, second or third bedrooms of their sort of middle-class homes in the leafy suburbs. I can tell you that talking to real people, taxi drivers, shopkeepers, construction workers, bar owners, I haven't found anybody that is in favour of this government's approach. My own son phoned me on Sunday night in an absolute fury. He'd been out with various mates. They all feel they're being completely shafted as a younger generation. The pennies really dropped with them that they're going to be picking up the tab for this incompetence, and they're very, very angry. And I was sort of actually sad but heartened to hear that, because we need the young to rise up completely. And you're so right. It's very interesting. Look, I mean, the truth is the government has terrified half the nation and it's made the other half furious. I genuinely think the divide over COVID now is potentially as divisive or more or worse than the debate over Brexit. And that's not a good thing. You're absolutely right. We've got lots of furious people who happen to vote Remain, who are furious with the government and support our approach. You can see that on Twitter, on my email and text traffic over the last 24 hours. Likewise, sure, there are people who supported us over Brexit who don't think we've got this right. But funny enough, they might agree with us on some of the future reform measures needed, but on COVID, they have been terrified by the government. So look, that's the joy of democracy. That's the joy of constantly looking forward. And actually, I love that. And the ability to reach out to young people who previously may have been considered, strongly Remain orientated. Actually, that is a huge untapped source of support. And we will very much be going for that, setting up societies across universities across the whole of UK. We've already started a discussion about that just yesterday. So yes, we'll be looking to deepen our reach amongst groups across the UK who may not naturally have been previous supporters, but you've always got to look forwards. You can't do anything about history. You should certainly never eradicate it. You need to be proud of all the successes and learn from the mistakes. But we're looking forwards. We're getting lots of support, and I think that will grow as people see that we've got a real agenda for change. And of course, it's not just changing the approach to dealing with the virus, but the immediate critical thing after that will be how we essentially how we recover. And I constantly loathe it when I hear others talk about tax rises here, tax rises there. There's only one way to recover sensibly out of this crisis, and that is we have to go for growth big time. We have to put the foot flat on the on the 8th gear, or create a 9th gear of growth and go for it. And one of the ways to do that, and my sort of new simple expression is we genuinely need to become most incredibly patriotic consumers. We need to think British, we need to make British, and we need to buy British.
Yeah.
And we need to learn from our neighbours and friends, the French, because whether you love them or not, they are wonderfully patriotic consumers. You know, they make great products like wine, cheese, cars, yogurt, and they buy their own products very consciously, very deliberately. And that is to be admired and copied and celebrated. It's a huge opportunity for us. You know, Boris talked the other week about massively increasing the amount of renewable energy from offshore wind farms. Fine, Boris, but we don't have a single major turbine manufacturer here in the UK, not one. We don't have a single commercial significant manufacturer in the UK of solar panels, right? So that must change. And likewise, with things like government procurement, the government should make it an absolute preemption, a standard view that government contracts should be to buy British unless there is a good reason otherwise. That should be the focus. You know, we've always had a huge deficit every year of, you know, more money being spent, being essentially importing goods as opposed to being earned exporting goods. We need to stop sending money overseas. We need to start spending it, investing it, and growing it here in the UK. It's incredibly simple. If we make and buy British, we will grow so much faster than you know, if we sort of try and tax our way out of this crisis, in which case that will just lead to slow, austerity-like stagnation.
Richard, I think that's a good, strong, positive message on which to end. So thank you for your time. We really appreciate it today at Brexit Watch.
Great. Thanks a lot. Cheers, Jonathan.